So welcome everyone and happy Tu B'Shvat. But our
You.
our class today will not focus on Tu B'Shvat, but maybe you can find a connection at the end of class. We'll see. We're going to focus on the parsha this week, Yitro, and Yitro comes to visit his son-in-law Moses, and he gives him advice. So that's what we're going to discuss today.
Unsolicited advice. You forgot
Yes,
to say that.
but that's what parents-in-law do. Right? I'm not yet a parent-in-law, but when I will be, I think that's
Yeah.
right. That's the role.
Wouldn't advise it, but anyway.
Oh, so Aaron says from experience, yes. All right. So um, the topic is, was his advice only about efficiency or something else? That's what so just to sort of review what most of you probably already know. So here's he visits him. He says, "I heard about these great miracles that you had, and how are the grandchildren? How's everybody doing?" And the next morning, he sees something and he gives unsolicited advice. So, do we have a volunteer to read the text?
Okay. Now the next day, Moshe sat to judge the people, and the people stood before Moshe from daybreak until sunset. Moshe's father-in-law saw all that he had to do for the people. He said, "What kind of matter is this that you do for the people? Why do you sit alone while the entire people stations itself around you from daybreak until sunset?" Moshe said to his father-in-law, "When the people comes to me to inquire of God, when it has some legal matter, it comes to me. I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known God's laws and instructions." You want to
Yeah,
continue?
yeah. Now listen to
Now
me.
listen to me. And then Moshe's father-in-law said to him, "Not good is this matter as you do it. You will become worn out, yes, worn out, both you and this people that are with you. For this matter is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me."
Yeah. And then comes the advice how to fix the problem. And he sets up the judicial system where I'll continue. You shall also seek out from among all the people capable men who fear God, trustworthy men who spurn ill-gotten gain. Set these over them as chiefs of thousands, chiefs of hundreds, chiefs of fifties, and chiefs of tens, and let them judge the people at all times. And then Moses heeded his father-in-law and did just as he had said. So, um, and then the Torah describes how he went and searched for these people. So, a lot of details. And the question that I want to ask is, why is this story explained in so much detail? But I like the way that the Aleph Beta video framed the question. So I'll show you the how he frames the question, and then let's see if we can come up with some answers of our own before we see his answer. So I hope you see the video, and let's play just the question.
Story really confuses me. What's the Torah trying to teach us here? That we shouldn't take on too many responsibilities, and we might want to consider delegating every now and then? Well, that's useful advice for those of us looking to be more productive. So is making good lists, proper diet and exercise, and a healthy balance of work time and me time. But the Torah doesn't devote chapters to all of those. It doesn't need to. They're common sense. So then why is this story, which seems to be about nothing more than common sense efficiency, in the Torah at all?
Okay, how would you answer his question?
Well, maybe the story has something to do with democratizing the system, taking power away from Moshe and giving it to other people.
Ah, excellent idea.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And also, he's sharing the blame when things go wrong.
Okay. Um, Sharing the blame if things go wrong. Okay. Okay. Here's my second question. Why couldn't Moshe think about this himself? After all, does it take such genius to think about, hey, why don't we have other people participate in the system and be, lower court judges and then higher court judges, and then I'll be the Supreme Court judge.
Most
So,
most
yeah.
leaders don't like to give up power.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
And it's a strange thing because we always learn over and over how humble Moshe was. This is not a humble behavior.
To hoard all the power by
Absolutely.
himself.
Well, and with the assumption that nobody else can do it as well as he can.
Ah, okay, interesting. So it's hard for him to give up power because leaders don't want to give up power in general, but also because he's worried that the others won't um, implement the laws. And he talks about God's laws. We saw that in the verse um, when he talks about when it has some legal matter, it comes to me, I judge between man and his neighbor and make known God's laws. So I know God's laws, right? Only I can interpret them
Yeah.
the correct
Sure.
way. I'm not sure I can delegate this to the people. Okay, very interesting. So let's see what Rabbeinu Bachya says. Wait 1 second. Uh, Again, he talks about the efficiency. So volunteer to read Rabbeinu Bachya from the 14th century.
Okay, Yitro meant that it was irresponsible, forbidden even, for Moses to undergo such a strain and to make the people undergo such a strain. Many would stand in line and wait and never get around to have their problems aired before Moses.
So he sees it as what? As a problem of, how would you,
Efficiency.
I'm sorry, Aaron?
Efficiency. Huh?
Well,
Yes,
no, it's more than that. I mean, if you stand in line and you don't get heard, then you become discontented, and then you have a revolution.
so to prevent a coup, I like that.
Yeah.
To prevent challenge to his authority. Yeah. So Yitro is thinking about, look, you're my son-in-law. I want you to remain, I want you to succeed in your leadership. If this continues, then you'll have an uprising. You'll have an insurrection. Eventually, it will get to the point. People will be so fed up. Their cases are not being tried in time, and that affects the economy. And then your leadership will go poof.
Yep.
And yeah, and which he did have later in the Torah, right? The Korach mutiny, the Korach rebellion. So apparently, even though he did implement this, Korach was able to rally the crowd against Moses. So we see that there's already this lingering, like you say, discontent of the leadership that he took advantage of, Korach. So okay, so this is the Rabbeinu Bachya how he sees it. So I want to go back to Aaron's point, and we're going to see that we're going to focus on one line that Yitro says, and maybe that could be a clue. Here's a picture of the long lines that Yitro saw. And remember, he said, it's not good. Lo tov hadavar. These are Yitro's words, asher ata oseh. Where else in the Torah, lo tov hadavar? And then he also said, you doing this all levad, alone. So where else in the Torah did somebody say, lo tov, this is not good? A situation of being alone.
But Adam and when God created Chava.
Oh, excellent. So yeah, very good. So that is exactly how God phrased the justification for creating Eve. Let's look at the verses together, and we'll see that God uses the same language, the same two key words, lo tov. So we're going back to Genesis chapter 2, right? The beginning of the Torah. And God gives Adam in verse 17. You guys see verse 17?
Yep.
Yes. She's not created yet. So he gives him a warning. But as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. And right after that, verse 18, Vayomer Adonai Elohim, Lo tov heyot ha'adam levado. So both key words, lo tov, not good. This is words that Yitro used, and levado also. Yitro used it, but of course conjugated it when talking to Moses. It would be levadcha because he's talking second person. He's talking like I would be talking to you. I would say levadcha versus talking about somebody. So uh, not good and alone. So, but is that enough to say that there's a correlation? That the Torah is trying to hint to this story just because we found two key words. So I don't think it's just these two keywords because there was another component that is parallel in both stories, and that is that there's a search. Look at verse 19. Right? And Adonai formed out of the earth all the wild beasts, all the birds of the sky, and brought them to the human to see what he would call them. And whatever human called each living creature, that would be its name. And the human gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky, to all the wild beasts, but no fitting counterpart for a human being was found. And then the creation of Eve. So Adonai cast a deep sleep, the famous rib, taking out from his rib. But you see, there was a search, and the search yielded zero results. There was no fitting counterpart. Ezel kenegdo, that's how they translate it here, but this is already an interpretation. The word ezel means what?
Help.
Right. So it should have, let's see, the translation that I like, Professor Fox, he tries to say as close as he can to the Hebrew. Let's see what he does here. The Shotgun Bible. Do you guys see it, or am I just reading without, you say it, right? On the side.
Yeah.
So the human called out names. No, we want this verse. And the man gave names to all the cattle, to the birds of the air, to every beast of the field, but for the man there was not found a help. There you go. Like Aaron said, to match him. So seeking help and not finding it, and then creating Eve, she will be his help. Now let's go back to Yitro. That's the purpose of the whole search there of finding these judges to help Moses with adjudicating cases, to offload from him this huge caseload that he has of doing it all by himself. So a parallel of a search and then finding help. Not just words that are clues, but the actual the main theme of both stories is a search for someone that can help. Now, it's a very different kind of help, you might say. What is the help that God seeks with Eve, with creating Eve, with creating the woman? How would you?
Companionship.
Oh, companionship. And versus here in our story, Yitro, it's not exactly companionship, right? They're not being companions to Moshe. They're going to actually help him adjudicate cases. They're going to take some of his work and do it so that he can devote more time to being with God, to taking the difficult cases. So even though it's not the same kind of a help, we see something very interesting. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so we saw that in both cases, Adam needs a partner, Moshe needs partners. Adam surveys all the animals searching, and Moshe surveying the people and searching for the right ones. They have to qualify. Like Yitro gave him qualifications, criteria that these people should be God-fearing. They should be spurn ill-gotten gains, not so you won't be able to bribe them, etc. Okay, so but the help is different. Here, it's help with settling disputes versus Adam is companionship. So how are you going to compare the two? So I want to go back to the video because he makes a very interesting point that I never realized, and I want to show you again in the verses, the creation of Eve. What did it come after? And maybe that's a clue that will help us in connecting the two stories. So look, and I never realized this. Eve never got the prohibition. She never heard the prohibition, which makes her sort of tempting Adam. It sheds a whole different light on her. Now I see her in a very positive light because look, in verse 17, that's when God gives the prohibition to Adam, or the way they called it here, human. On the day that you must not eat of it. And then, verse 18, lo tov, heyot adam levado. Not good is it for man to be alone. And all the animals are not companions. They're not great companions for him. And so let's put him to sleep and let's create Eve. And then this one shall be called woman. So, and all these years I've heard the story, I never realized she actually never heard God prohibit Adam from eating from the tree of knowledge. So then when later she comes to him and she says to the snake, the woman replies to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. It is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden. This is all hearsay. Probably Adam told her, but she never heard it actually from God. So, it really, you can't put all the blame on her. Definitely not, because it was Adam who heard God. Maybe Adam misheard God, right? And now he's telling it to Eve, and she's not sure. Maybe it was the right words. But let's try to connect it. Why was she created right after the prohibition? Is there anything that is a message here? What is the idea of, God could have created Eve at any point in the story. Why are these two things juxtaposed next to each other? Verse 16 and 17, here's the trees that you can eat of every tree, but then there's one tree which you cannot eat. And then right after that, it's not good that you're alone. I'm going to create woman. Is there a thematic connection between these two things? What do you think? Or is it just coincidence? So my question is, can you see how the creation of Eve would help maybe Adam comply with this prohibition, the first commandment that he gets, right? It's the first commandment given to any human being from God. And God says, you know what? Adam cannot do this alone. Why? Why do you think?
Well, she
Well,
definitely provided a distraction.
yeah, that, maybe he really wants to eat from that tree, but if he has something else that he loves even more than the fruit of that tree, then he won't need that
Ah,
fruit.
excellent. I like that. So he will be busy with her, and it will help him avoid this temptation. Now, the story did not turn out that way, and that's maybe the irony of it. That we plan and we plan, and here even God plans, and it doesn't turn out the way God expected it to be, because then she's the one who tempts him in the end. But I like what you're saying, that it's much easier to comply with resisting a temptation, or it's much easier to resist a temptation when you are distracted, when you have something that you really love doing, right? And so he'll have companionship, he'll have romance with a woman, and that will take his mind off this very juicy looking, good looking tree, the tree of knowledge, that's how it's described later on in the verse. Let's look at it. Um, uh, when the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took its fruit and ate. So you can imagine the temptation for Adam, and maybe God's plan initially was, if there's a woman in the picture, he won't be tempted. She'll take his mind off. She'll be the one giving him wisdom and desire and all these things. So now we'll see how this connects. So for the last few minutes, we're going to go back to the video, and he explains it really, really nice. The connection between these two stories. You'll see. Now that we saw it with our own eyes, we can go back to the video. Okay. So I'll share the video and let's watch together. Okay, let's do it full screen. Okay.
From the tree of knowledge of good and evil, don't eat from that one. Ki biyom acholcha mimenu mot tamut. For on the very day you eat from that tree, you will die. And the very next verse is Lo tov heot ha'adam levado. So first God says, Adam, stay away from the tree of knowledge. It can kill you. And then, right after, God says, hey, you know what? Adam really shouldn't be alone. He needs help. Well, doesn't that seem to suggest that the reason man needed a helper was to help him avoid eating from the tree? I know. It seems like a bizarre thing to suggest. After all, look how things turned out. The exact opposite happened. Adam's partner actually fed him the forbidden fruit. But the text really does seem to be pushing us in this direction. Okay, so Adam's Ezer Kenegdo is meant to help him avoid eating from the tree of knowledge. But how? I mean, what is she expected to do? God didn't decide to create a bouncer to stand guard over the forbidden tree. He just created a second human being. Is a partner, by simply existing, somehow supposed to help man resist the tree? I think so, based on an idea I heard Rabbi Foreman share a few times about what exactly the tree of knowledge was. Here's how I
Okay, so we can stop here and I want to hear your ideas. What if Eve is not in the picture, or in general, what are two things that cause people to sin? In terms of violating prohibitions, doing things they know they're not supposed to, they've been told not to do it, and they still do it. Neve, you're studying criminal justice. Neve, are you with us? Oh.
Yeah.
So, share some of your insights. What are several things that cause people to commit crimes? Intelligent people, they know it's wrong. It's not that I'm not talking about necessity. You know, people living outside homeless and stealing something to survive. Not that kind of crime. People that are well off, they know the rules, they know the laws, and they still commit crimes, financial crimes, whatever crimes. Violent crimes. What?
Mental illness is part of it.
Okay, they don't have mental illness. Is power?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
People are greedy.
Greedy.
However
Okay.
much you have, you always want more.
You always want more.
Nature.
Right. And you think you can get away with it.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. They think they can get away with it.
Oh, right. So power, they have power, and often they are alone. Let's take the recent killing of a terrible killing in Manhattan, the daytime murder of the CEO of the health insurance guy. The guy who's suspected of killing him, he hasn't been convicted yet, lived off the radar by himself with no friends, no connection to his family for half a year before that. A classic example of somebody living in his own world, slowly descending into this self-justification. Oh, it's okay to commit this murder because this company is doing terrible things and preventing, all the rationalizing of crime that people can do when they don't have people to consult with. Imagine if he had friends, family, and he told them about how he's so troubled by this. Hopefully they would have weaned him off this crazy idea that it's okay to murder the CEO of a health insurance because they don't give the benefits that they're supposed to give. There's other ways to protest that. Go have a hunger strike in front of his house. If you really want to be committed to the cause. But he was alone. I read, lived like with no connection to people. So it's being alone, and it's thinking that you're invincible. And he's gonna talk about those two things.
And the second thing is solitude. Because even if you have power, if that power is shared with others, that also forces you to realize you're not the master. You can't pretend you're the head honcho if, say, you're a senator or a board member, and dozens of people are just as powerful as you. But if it's just you at the top, as a president or a CEO, if you're given authority, expected to lead, and people comply with what you say, then all your life experiences are pushing you to think of yourself as the final arbiter of right and wrong. Wouldn't that make it hard to remember there's a moral code to which you're beholden? And I think the headlines confirm it. They're filled with powerful, solitary figures who've managed to convince themselves they're entitled to anything. Perhaps that's why a partner was deemed necessary for Adam to have a chance at avoiding the tree of knowledge. Because without a partner, alone in the garden without an equal, free to eat almost anything he wanted, how long could Adam be expected to follow the rules? But with her presence to remind Adam he was not unique, that he wasn't the master, Eve, at least in theory, gave Adam a chance. Let's bring this all back to Moshe and Yitro. I think we're in a position to understand what these parallels are trying to teach us. On the surface, Adam and Moshe face two very different struggles. Moshe seems to be dealing with an efficiency problem. He's overburdened and needs to distribute some of the labor of judging to other people. And Adam seems to be dealing with the problem of resisting the lure of the tree of knowledge. But maybe underneath the surface, these struggles are not so different. Think about Moshe's situation. He was in a position of great power over the Israelites, and he was doing it all alone. Power and solitude, the recipe for disaster. And so, perhaps, despite the very different circumstances, Moshe was at risk of eating from the tree of knowledge in his own way as much as Adam had been. He was on the path to believing he was the master over the Israelites, not just the one to explain good and evil, but to actually decide it. Perhaps the reason the Torah recounts the story of Yitro the way it does is to direct our attention to Adam, to tell us that the deeper issues in both stories are one and the same. No matter how great a man is, no matter how he ends up justifying it to himself, if he holds power and holds it alone, he will face the delusion that his power, his authority, is greater than it truly is. And an essential way to combat this delusion is to have a real partner. In Adam's case, Eve, another human. And in Moshe's case, moral partners. People who wouldn't be swayed by convenience or gain, who would deal with all people, Moshe included, with honesty and integrity. So in the end, did we arrive at a lesson all that different from don't do everything by yourself? Maybe not. But the reason is the real lesson. It's not about efficiency or sustainability. It's about the effect of being too alone. The more often others rely on us, or we rely on ourselves to make important decisions, the more trust we develop for our own intuitions, the more likely we are to come to overtrust in them, and to believe we're greater than we are. But if we surround ourselves with people we can respect, people who can keep us humble and honest, who won't just tell us what we want to hear, if we acquire the right kinds of partners for ourselves, then we can be the right kind of partners with God.
So I want to add, you can't surround yourself with yes men. And
Well, but that's the assumption. I take the lesson. I think it's a good lesson, but it's resting on the assumption that people who are at a lower level have the gumption to talk back to the leader. And I think that history has shown that ain't true
yeah,
over and
not just
over.
history, the current events have.
Well,
Well, that's, one of the books about Lincoln was that he surrounded himself by people who had different philosophies than him, and that by surrounding himself with his enemies, he
that's true.
knew both sides of the debate always.
And he
And that
listened
was his
too.
brilliance.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's very
And,
interesting.
Yeah.
today we have someone who will not even talk or listen to anyone who doesn't
not only that, he fires anybody who doesn't share his
Right. So
yeah,
he's all by himself at
all
the
by
top,
himself. Yeah,
except for Musk.
yeah, yeah. And like they said in the video, recipe for disaster. I hope we don't get there.
Yeah, I'm afraid
So,
we're heading that way.
Yeah.
so Shammai, it was a very interesting lesson, but there's something I don't understand. So, isn't the lesson that we're supposed to learn from the Garden of Eden that Eve tempted Adam, and therefore people were or they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. But now we learn that Eve didn't know that she wasn't supposed to eat from the tree. So, I mean, but
And she was more seriously punished because of the pain of childbirth, which supposedly came from her sin in the Garden of Eden.
but
Yeah.
but according to this, she didn't sin. She didn't know that she wasn't
Right.
supposed.
Right.
No, she
didn't.
didn't
And
hear
God never talks to
talk to
Eve.
her.
He talks to Adam.
So,
Yeah.
You
so
know,
doesn't
so like
No, yeah,
it
but
doesn't-
she then gets into a discussion with him and says that what the serpent, what you're thinking is wrong. We can eat it, and so she's aware that this is problematic. In other words, it's not that she wasn't there and at all, and she's just plucked into the story, and she's totally innocent and never even knew there's a problem. She knows there's a problem, um, and really um, we have to look at the verses there. Maybe next Bereshit we'll do it because, but the one thing we saw today, yes, she never heard God explicitly tell Adam, "Don't eat it."
so then she's innocent.
Yeah, but God created, but we saw what we did see that God created her right after the prohibition. So I like his explanation that those two things are tied. God expected her to help him. In other words, God expected Adam to
Okay,
share that with his wife.
okay, that's great. As I said, it's very interesting. But doesn't all this undermine the whole story of the Garden of Eden? That or that Eve, that Eve knew she shouldn't that they shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge, and she did it anyway. But if she didn't know, then
that's true. But you know what? God undermines the story because he says at the beginning, if you do this, you're going to die. And guess what? They don't. So what's the moral of the story?
Well, the moral is blaming somebody else. We constantly see each time that God comes to the person, instead of admitting, they blame somebody else. Right? First, God talks to Adam and he says, "Oh, it's Eve's fault." Then God talks to Eve, and what does she say?
It's the snake's
It's the
fault.
snake's fault. I see that as the message. Shirking responsibility.
Yeah.
And we see that happening today all the time. Okay. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
thank you,
Shimon.
Shabbat.
Okay. Have a good night.
Good night.